I don't think the Prime Minister will get through, one way or the other. I don't think he'll get through to the autumn. And this policy just doesn't seem to be even timed, therefore, for a general election correctly either. So it's everything about this policy, the deterrent effect, the timings, the cost of the policy. I think Rishi Sunak's taken some brave decisions as Prime Minister. He cancelled HS2. It was one of the bravest decisions. I bet Labour will not reverse this because we put so much money into that policy, and it was very brave to say, well, I'm not going to spend any more. But it was a brave decision, but I just regret that he didn't say the same about Rwanda. He should have said it's too expensive and I'm going to abandon it. But he's...
So this argument, this policy is about to exit Parliament, then it'll go no doubt into the courts, and from then on to some, I think, unnamed airfield and awaiting aeroplane. So as we sit here now at this particular point, Kate and Tim, how much do you think this bill, this plan, this policy matters? Whether as an answer to the problem of cross-channel boats, or as a political solution to the Rishi Sunak's problem?
Look, half of me is 100% with Rishi Sunak. I think Conservative voters in particular, but I think all voters, opinion polls suggest, are genuinely offended by small boats crossing the channel. People have a sense that Britain is being broken into, in some ways, to use the phrase that the Conservative MP Danny Kruger has mentioned. There's a real sense of injustice here, of people staying in hotels that a lot of British people can't afford to stay in themselves, while their asylum applications, their residency applications are being processed. So I can understand the need for something to be done, but where I am completely at a loss is that this is the answer. If people are willing to, at a very basic level, of course we've said this almost so many times, John, as you know, but at a very basic level, if someone is willing to cross the busiest shipping lane in the world to get to Britain, they are already making a big gamble.
Yeah.
And even if this policy gets through the courts, gets through the Lords today, all the rest of it, hundreds will go to Rwanda at most. That's a very small percentage of the tens of thousands who come, probably still planning to come.
Yes.
So the deterrent effect just doesn't make sense to me. And so day after day, week after week, John Pienaar programme after John Pienaar programme, we talk about this because the Prime Minister's put it on the map to such an extent. This is time that could be spent addressing the crime problem.
Yeah.
It could be addressing the NHS, could be addressing the fact we have a sluggish economy. I do not get that this policy will have its desired effect.
Yeah.
And so although I understand why you should want something like this, a little unscientific poll I did amongst my, followers on Twitter, not the most left-wing of group, 4% of 4,000 people who voted thought that this would make any substantial difference.
Yes.
I think this policy will become a case study in political malpractice in the years ahead.
You're making me feel almost, though not quite, guilty for raising the subject.
Sorry, John.
Again, I didn't pile eggs into this particular basket, as you know. Do you share any of the confidence in government, I suppose, if it's there, that this is going to have a deterrent effect, Kate? Because you do hear and you read in the Home Office there are plenty of officials who just don't believe it will.
Yeah, I think you've got to ask what the intention is behind this policy. And I think there are now so many things that Rwanda has become for the Tory party that it will never satisfy most of them. That's the reality here. The first is, will it act as a deterrent? Well, Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, but when Boris Johnson was in charge, of course, we understand, raised his own concerns. The fact that you would only ever be able to send a small number of people to Rwanda, the fact that people have already taken pretty risky decisions to make it here in the first place, and the cost, Rishi Sunak as Chancellor suggested, would make it, not a decent policy to pursue. He now believes it will work as a deterrent, partly because the government has enacted a policy with Albania to send people back to Albania, and he says that's an example of how a deterrent can work because the number of Albanians crossing in small boats is now much, much smaller. There is an argument to say that in theory it works, but in reality, Albania is a different country and everybody is coming from Albania. Not everybody is coming from the same place in small boats. There are things the government can do with those levers, though. I think the bigger question is, for the Tory party and for the Prime Minister, Rwanda has become, the saving grace. It's become the way to win the election. It's become the way to stick it to Labour. It's become the way to quiet the right wing of the Tory party. And it just doesn't really do any of those things. No. And that's the biggest political problem with it as a policy. Because if you keep talking about it, even when you deliver the flights, if people at home don't feel any different because they still they still can't get a GP appointment, they still can't get their kid into the right school, and they may well blame those things on immigration. It might not be the fault of immigration, but they might blame it on immigration. Then this policy doesn't answer that question, and nor does it really answer the others either.
No.
So it's a really, it's a difficult one.
And you're right to point out that the Albanian leg of this policy has had a significant
huge,
effect. It's had the desired effect, but the problem is there aren't any other Albanians.
Well, the Vietnam is a question about Vietnam now, which the government says that there's increasing numbers of migrants coming over in small boats from Vietnam because they are being targeted by traffickers because they don't understand the policy. This is what the government says. So they've agreed a deal with Vietnam to basically try and stop that from happening, which they think will have a similar effect. But just the numbers out today, ironically out at the same time as the press conference, in the same period last year, 5,049 people had crossed the channel in small boats. In this year, 6,265. So that is obviously a 24% increase in people arriving.
Yeah, and I think we've made the point that these are the numbers at the moment. When we get further into the summer and the weather brightens up and the water's calm, rather, it's a universal expectation that the volume of traffic across the channel is going to increase quite significantly, which gets us back to where we started with you, Kate, which is the idea of election timing, because if you're trying to make the right impression, a big increase in the volume of that traffic is not helpful.
Well, it's sort of 10 to 12 weeks, the Prime Minister's saying, until this policy will start. So that sort of takes us into the middle of July.
Yeah.
So, I am...
Well, it's going to coincide with the increase in traffic.
Absolutely, yeah. And Kate says that she has given up at being a May girl, obviously. I've always been a November boy. But I don't think the Prime Minister will get through, one way or the other. I don't think he'll get through to the autumn. And this policy just doesn't seem to be even timed, therefore, for a general election correctly either. So it's everything about this policy, the deterrent effect, the timings, the cost of the policy. I think Rishi Sunak's taken some brave decisions as Prime Minister. He cancelled HS2. It was one of the bravest decisions. I bet Labour will not reverse this because we put so much money into that policy, and it was very brave to say, well, I'm not going to spend any more. But it was a brave decision, but I just regret that he didn't say the same about Rwanda.
Yeah.
He should have said it's too expensive and I'm going to abandon it. But he's so far in now, obviously he just has to keep ploughing on. But
I know you're a critical...
don't understand it.
I know you're a critical friend, Tim, but I mean, do you know that there's a dartboard in Downing Street with an image of you on it? And the Prime Minister's team have target practice on a daily basis. And when this show's on air, they will listen, as you know, religiously. It's torn to pieces. They need a new dartboard.
Well, Rishi Sunak spoke to the Centre for Social Justice on Friday, which is a think tank that I helped found. And I said to the current Chief Executive, Andy, I said, I probably won't come and sit in the front row on Friday. And he didn't say, Tim, no, please come. He said, yeah, that's probably a good idea. I'm not Downing Street's favourite person. But
one of our listeners, it's interesting your commentators were saying not long ago that Rwanda will never happen. Now they're switched to it will never work. Is it just your narrative is set saying nothing can work for Sunak, and that's the answer, whatever the question is? So there's an unpersuaded listener.
I mean, I don't think I've ever said I don't think it will ever happen, partly because nobody really ever knew whether the government was going to get this legislation through, and Rishi Sunak has always been incredibly determined. I think the bigger point, though, that person and others make is that when you talk about Rwanda, it often gets tied up in a conversation about how talking about immigration is wrong in some way. It's a bad thing to talk about, oh, you must be a bigot, or you just don't want anyone else in the country, you want to lock everything down. And when those things get tied together, it becomes really, really difficult to solve that problem because everybody takes sides and you can't get through it. What actually needs to happen in this debate is a bit of honesty and a bit of levelling with the country. And actually, when you look at some of the more in-depth polling about immigration, when you say to people, would you like more nurses from abroad? People say, yeah. Would you like more teachers? Yeah, that sounds great. Happy with that. People are not anti-immigration. They just don't want it to feel like it's not fair, which is where the Rwanda policy comes from. But it doesn't necessarily solve the fundamental problems that more immigration brings with it.
Tim?
Let me try and get myself off that dartboard in number 10, just briefly for a moment, John. There's one possible political benefit or reason why they're doing this that I think might yet make sense. And that's when the Prime Minister said today the courts won't stop this policy, I thought, are you sure? What if the courts stop it? Is that actually what Rishi Sunak wants?
Well, that's the right wing.
Yeah.
That's
Does
the
he
right
then
wing's-
want to say, I've done everything, I've moved heaven and earth to get this policy over the line. The only way we can get control of our borders, not just Rwanda, but generally, is to leave the ECHR. And suddenly it's not Rwanda that is the policy that's on the electoral agenda. It's the ECHR.
But
and
how are you
Labour is
selling it on
challenged.
the doorstep, though? How are you going to somebody who's saying, I can't get a GP appointment and I'm fed up of it and I'm fed up of you and you've had loads of time, and if your message is, well, don't worry because we're going to leave the ECHR, I'm just not sure that's going to be convincing enough, is it?
Well, is it going to turn around the Tory party's fortunes and mean that the Tories return with a majority? No. But could it shore up the Tory vote? That's why the Tories performed so disastrously in 1997, was Tory voters stayed at home.
Right.
Is this sort of a policy that can energise Tory voters? And it may be exaggerated, but of course there is a link in a lot of voters' minds between not being able to get the NHS appointment that you mentioned, Kate, and there's too many immigrants in people's... Now, of course...
Yeah.
The other side is that immigrants often power the NHS.
They are staffing, and
power
I
the
think
NHS.
part of that
So
is,
it's complicated, but I think for the average Tory voter, the kind of red wall voter that Rishi Sunak needs to get to, this might be a policy where there's an incredibly clear dividing line between him and Starmer. The danger, of course, is the now very well organised One Nation group inside the parliamentary party objects to this, and so the story isn't the divide between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, becomes the divide inside the Conservative Party. It's fraught with danger, but there is no path for the Conservative Party ahead that isn't fraught with danger.
No, for the life of me, I cannot see a way to promise, even give a veiled promise of putting out of the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights, at all. I mean, it can't go into the manifesto, because if it does, you're going to split the party at the beginning of an election campaign, and we will be pulling ministers to pieces in this and studios all over the world of broadcasting. However,
What odds would you give me, John? Because I think it's unlikely.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't rule it out. I really wouldn't rule it out.
Well,
Like
I suppose when you're out of options, you then grab whatever straw floats by. I mean, here's another one of our listeners. It's no longer about the boats, okay? It's about who governs Britain, our elected government or lefty hand-wringers. So if you're looking for a defensive line to take and you're out of lines and you're out of options because the economy isn't looking so great as a line for an election campaign, maybe you do end up where you're describing.
Who was that? Listener, was it R. Sunak?
It's not signed. That quite. Tell us what you think about that. What position do you take on this? Send me a text. Send me a tweet. Kate McCann's here. Tim Montgomerie's here. You are there. And since you are there, tell me what you're thinking. Send me a WhatsApp voice note. Join in. Let's hear what you think. 0333 003 2353 or a tweet using the hashtag TimesRadio.